Hello, my name is Adrienne, and this is my dog Nacho. We recently moved here to magnificent Edinburgh from Toronto, Canada. Join us as we learn about our new home here in Scotland. I'll be doing my best to gather research and share all of the incredible and sometimes quirky history I can along the way. And it just makes sense to check out a few of the pubs here too. In this series, we are making our way down to Newhaven Harbour to catch a glimpse of its spectacular sunset. Starting off on our adventure, we are in King George V Park, named after King George V, who died in 1936. We are currently at the northern end of the now disused Scotland Street Tunnel, which I promise to get to shortly. This park is accessible from Scotland Street to the south, Ayr Place to the north, and Summerbank to the east, and lies close to the city centre, only a 10-minute walk from St. Andrew's Square and Princes Street. The park, as it is today, was officially opened to the public in 1950 by the Duke of Buccleuch. It undoubtedly looks stunning today, but you might be surprised to hear that this park once held one of the most extraordinary and unique attractions in Victorian Britain. Enter John Cox. John Cox was born around 1805 into a wealthy family who had made their fortune in the production of glue and gelatin. He had joined the family business as a young man and excelled by improving production processes and seeking out new uses for their products. The story has it that John could not help but notice that many of his fellow citizens were far from in good health, especially those of the lower classes, just like the people working for him. It seems that while the elite classes were using their free time to hunt or play golf, the working class were not given as much of an opportunity for voluntary exercise. John was dreaming on an epic scale when he formulated his plan. With the final draining of the Cannon Mills Lock in 1865, this became the site of the Royal Patent Gymnasium. At its peak, people would come from all over to participate in athletics competitions. It is recorded that they had received up to 15,000 visitors during such competitions. Advertised as the new wonder of Edinburgh, it was regarded as much, if not more, of a tourist attraction than the castle at the time. It had been likened to going to Disneyland nowadays, but at a 6-pence admission fee, about £3 today or $5 Canadian, it was slightly lighter on the wallet. So yes, as I said, 6 pence for all the terrifying thrills of the following attractions. The principal feature was the circular Great Sea Serpent, which boasts that it could seat 600 rowers embarking and disembarking at 4 separate piers at opposite sides of the island at the same time. Another popular apparatus was a temporary exhibition. It was a giant seesaw called Chang. At 100 feet long and 7 feet wide, it could accommodate up to 200 people and lift them up to 50 feet in the air. By the way, if anyone has any intel on the physics behind this, please comment below. The patent velocipede paddle merry-go-round. This was 160 feet in circumference and could accommodate up to 600 people. The self-adjusting trapeze. This enabled gymnasts to swing by their hands a distance of 130 feet from one trapeze to the other. I had honestly thought that I would come across hundreds of articles about tragedy and accidents in my research, but surprisingly found only one news story in my search from September 1866 in the Caledonian Mercury titled Wreck of the Great Sea Serpent at Cox's Gymnasium. During one of these massive athletics competitions, families in droves came out to the attraction. The men had mostly separated from their families to watch the competitions, while the women and children went off to enjoy the other attractions, mainly the paddle merry-go-round. When the competitions concluded, the write-up goes on to say, when the games were over, an ugly rush of men was made for the sea serpent. From the 2 nearest piers, a perfect crowd scrambled on board. Mr. Cox, seeing the danger of overbalance to the barge, called out to the crowd to spread themselves and not overload the boat. But little or no heed was paid by the eager multitude. In a minute, nothing was to be seen but the 4 paddle boxes and the struggling passengers. The men on the paddle boxes, who were the cause of the mischief, were still dry, but the women and children on the benches between were to the number of at least 100 immersed in the water. The bedraggled victims made the best of their way home, or to the Scotland Street railway station, for some had miles to go. By the late 19th century, the popularity of the gym was fading and it was forced to close, replaced by something slightly less grandiose, a football pitch. John Cox died on the 16th of January, 1874, in Edinburgh, age 69. Hiding behind that grate over there is a long-forgotten passage hiding a very interesting history. Since we're not getting through this way, I'll start telling you about what I found on the way through the Rodney Street Tunnel. The Rodney Street Tunnel is directly opposite the north end of the Scotland Street Tunnel. Rodney Street Tunnel and Trinity Tunnel, which is a mile or so to the north, have both been reopened for pedestrians and cyclists, and they both provide lighting just to make them less spooky. Built as a railway tunnel, the Scotland Street Tunnel has been used for everything from mushroom farming to radiation experiments. In 1847, the Edinburgh, Leith, and Newhaven Railway extended their route to the city centre through a large underground tunnel. Starting at Canal Street Station, this is adjacent to the current Waverley Station, the line went underneath Princes Street, St Andrews Square, Dublin Street, and Scotland Street, linking to Cannon Mills Station and then heading on to Newhaven and Granton. The tunnel was over 1,000 yards long and 24 feet in width and height. It was buried 49 feet below ground at St Andrews Square, coming up on a steep gradient, 1 in 27, to just below street level at Scotland Street. But right from the start, there were problems, accidents. In an effort to cut costs, the project had been put out to 3 or 4 separate contractors. By November 1884, the Scotland Street works were complete, and only the final, upwards, central stretch underneath St Andrews Square remained to be mined. Without a safety inspection of the upper section, but with the understanding that water from the former Norloch may have accumulated during the 8 months since its completion, the miners proceeded uphill with caution. Unfortunately, they had no way of knowing that the 2 parts of the tunnel were not fully aligned, with the lower section heading slightly to the east and into soft clay. When they drilled through what should have been solid rock, the clay gave way and a great mass of accumulated water burst through, killing all 4 men. The torrent washed 2 of the bodies from the tunnel mouth and flooded the surrounding area up to 4 feet deep. The tunnel later opened in May 1847, and just a few days after, another accident occurred. Going downhill involved a brake van to slow the train. The brake van was not coupled properly at Canal Station, and a few carriages suddenly headed downhill at super speed towards a train bound for Granton. In an excerpt from the Caledonian Mercury, dated the 24th of May, 1847, the brakesman was in at the time, and finding the truck commencing to descend, he applied himself to the brake. But he turned the screw the wrong way, so that instead of checking, he opened out the motion. The brakesman, not being properly trained beforehand, had assumed that the brake had become ineffectual, and he leaped from the train. The article reads, "The truck, which weighs about 7 tons, being thus uncontrolled, rolled down the tunnel with increased velocity. It must have reached a speed of 60 miles per hour when it saw issue forth at Scotland Street end of the tunnel, and in the next instant, dash into the train." In the end, 3 passengers on the Granton train were thrown onto the platform and suffered minor injuries. The brakesman also suffered minor injuries. Despite the huge cost, estimated nearly at £100,000, and extensive engineering that had gone into it, the tunnel closed to passengers in 1868, just 21 years after it had opened. The story doesn't end here, though. Closing to the public, the Scotland Street Tunnel remained in use for some years as a goods and coal depot. By 1887, thanks to the Scottish Mushroom Company, the tunnel was to find a new and quite unusual purpose. Because of the ideal dark and damp conditions, the organization had the idea to convert the northern entrance of the tunnel into a mushroom cultivation facility. Despite the initial success, each attempt at commercial mushroom growing was always halted by outbreaks of parasitic fungus. Mushroom cultivation continued here on and off until 1929, when the site was abandoned once again. Just over a decade later, the Scotland Street Tunnel was given another, much more sobering lease on life, this time as an air raid shelter during the Second World War. An emergency control center and bomb shelter was established inside, with room for over 3,000 people to take refuge in the event of an air raid. And because of its position, nearly 50 feet underground, the tunnel was seen as Edinburgh's safest as well as biggest air raid shelter. Bunkers and toilet blocks were installed with running water, electricity, and telephone systems. After the war, the tunnel was briefly used again in 1948 when a professor visiting the University of Edinburgh conducted a series of radiation experiments there. The reason was that the depth of the tunnel helped to block out any unwanted background radiation from any other sources. Then, in a failed attempt at a simple storage solution, the tunnel was briefly used by Cochrane garages in the 1960s to store up to 150 cars. This came to an end when a group of up to no good local youths broke in and started a fire. Finally, during the 1980s, the Edinburgh Newtown Conservation Committee used it as storage for slightly less valuable items like building salvage materials. The tunnel was closed for good in 1983 when Waverley Mall was built, thus closing off the southern entrance completely. All that remains is a small ventilation pipe grate on the northern wall of Waverley Station. Please join us next time as we continue our journey along the Water of Leith on our way to catch the ridiculous Newhaven Harbour sunset. Oh, and for every like and subscribe, Nacho thinks he'll get a treat. Thank you. Take care.